Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps continues to fire barrages of ballistic missiles at Israel, and this past week, debris from an intercepted missile landed in the Old City of Jerusalem, narrowly missing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Temple Mount itself. Meanwhile, the IDF has sent ground forces into southern Lebanon in what it says is a limited ground operation. The Air Force is also striking targets around the clock, specifically of the besieged militia and a fair number of besieged checkpoints in Tehran. The IDF seems to be laying the groundwork for a general uprising against the regime inside Iran, while the Americans are concentrating on opening up the Strait of Hormuz for energy shipments. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Friends, I must tell you right from the beginning that this report is usually about a half an hour, but this week there's been enough developments for me to sit here for about 5 hours talking nonstop, and we still wouldn't get to everything that deserves to be covered. So I'm going to just do my best to give you the main highlights and some analysis and commentary on them. And I encourage you to visit our website, visionforisrael.com, where we try to post more news updates and testimonies from our staff in Israel throughout the week. Now let's dive right in, because this week the IDF has been hard at work on two fronts, hitting targets in Iran itself and also fighting Iran's proxy, the Lebanese Shiite terror militia Hezbollah on the northern border. On Monday, the IDF announced that it had enough targets that it wanted to hit in Iran to continue this campaign for roughly another 3 weeks, which I must confess I found that to be a bit of a surprise, since President Trump said last week that the campaign was ahead of schedule and he believed it would be over soon because the U.S. military was running out of targets to hit. Now, this is probably an inevitable result of the fact that the American and Israeli goals for this war are not exactly in sync, and no one should be surprised by that. Now, even Winston Churchill once said that the only thing worse than going to war with allies is going to war without allies. There are always disagreements and about priorities, schedules, and much else. However, both the United States Central Command and the IDF have said over and over again that these disagreements over details should not be confused with disagreements over the really important big picture issues. Candidly, I'm not so sure about that, but for now, there does appear to be close coordination, unity, and a division of labor that's working well together. Speaking of which, the United States military has been concentrating its efforts on the IRGC's attempt to block the flow of oil and liquefied natural gas shipments through the Strait of Hormuz and hitting energy production infrastructure, which Iran has been hitting relentlessly in the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. Now, this is Iran's main line of effort in this war, as they appear to think that if they put enough pressure on the world economy, it will force America and Israel to back off and stop attacking them. I hate to say it, but this plan of Iran's is not going to work, even though they're trying their best. Oil has been trading above $100 a barrel, and the price of liquefied natural gas is also going through the roof. This is putting tremendous pressure on economies all over the world, including in the United States. Economics is a subject I've never had a very deep understanding of, but this much I know. Oil is the global economy, what blood is to the body of an individual person. So if you significantly decrease the supply of oil to the global economy, it can have an effect similar to what happens to a person who has a heart attack. Now, that's a crude metaphor, but I think you get the picture. Opening the Strait of Hormuz to oil and natural gas shipments is a major strategic priority of the United States right now, and rightfully so. President Trump has asked other countries, including China, Japan, and the NATO alliance, to assist in this effort, and for the most part, they have shown great reluctance to do so. Now, switching briefly to commentary mode, I am astounded and disgusted at this reluctance. These countries are proving what President Trump has been saying for years, that NATO is a bad investment for America, since the United States military is expected to carry the heaviest burdens while the rest of the alliance mostly free rides. Now, when President Trump is asking them to assist him in doing that they need to have done even more than America needs it, they don't want to get involved. It's shameful, and it's also deeply tragic. I'm sure that eventually these NATO countries will come to understand that they simply have no choice but to help open the Strait of Hormuz, not doing President Trump any favors, but doing themselves a favor. But there has already been some serious damage done to the transatlantic alliance, and I believe that some very bitter fruit will come from this. But it's not the only bitter fruit we'll soon be harvesting. In fact, another piece of bitter fruit that is already becoming more and more evident is the massive rise in antisemitism all over the world. This is a result of the narrative that Israel dragged President Trump into this war with Iran, and thus the rising cost of living for hundreds of millions of people all over the world is all Israel's fault. We always get the blame. If Israel hadn't dragged President Trump into this war with Iran, so they say, then Iran wouldn't have retaliated by shutting the Strait of Hormuz, and the price of oil wouldn't be going up, and the cost of groceries and electricity and fertilizer and everything else wouldn't be going up. See how that works? Now, for many people, if it's Israel's fault, they're paying more for gasoline, groceries, etc. Then it's perfectly a logical thing to attack a local synagogue. This has already happened in several cities in Western Europe, such as in the Netherlands, as well as in Toronto, and even the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, my hometown. It breaks my heart to see what has happened to my beloved state of Michigan, which was a great place to grow up back in the 1950s and 60s and early 70s when I was a kid and a child. But as sad as it makes me to see what's happened to Michigan, my home state, and for that matter, the United States and the entire Western world, it also makes me very happy and proud to see what's happening in my native country now, Israel. This country is standing strong despite all the challenges and despite being in the midst of the third year of war. And in some ways, it's the most intense chapter we've faced so far. Despite the intensity of the current conflict and the many hardships it's bringing, tens of thousands of Israelis who were abroad when this war with Iran started on February 28th have returned home as Ben Gurion International Airport is operating on a limited basis. As incredible as it might seem, there are also people coming to Israel right now on Aliyah, immigrating to Israel. And most people who are familiar with this scene say that when this war is over, large numbers of Jewish people from all over the world will be coming home to Israel. Of course, the country they'll be coming to will need a lot of help from all of you to recover from the human and economic costs that this war has imposed on us. And we'll also need a lot of help in absorbing all these new immigrants. So here at Vision for Israel, we're doing everything we can to assist Israeli families and communities, new immigrants, and people who have lived here their whole lives. Please watch this short video about how you can partner with us in these vitally important efforts. We all know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Welcome back, friends. Now, there's a lot more we could talk about regarding the rising tide of anti-Semitism in the world and the way it's pushing Jewish people to consider making Aliyah to Israel. Of particular concern to many of us is the large Jewish community in New York City, where the mayor barely even tries to conceal his contempt for Israel and has many close associates who are openly and unapologetically opposed to the existence of Israel, as well as being deeply and openly hostile to Jewish Americans. So please keep this in your prayers. And if you can do more than pray, please do so. But now we need to move on to other issues. And we'll start by getting back to the military campaign against Iran's Ayatollah regime. As I said before, there is a division of labor between the U.S. forces and the IDF. America's Air Force has assets Israel doesn't have, including strategic bombers that can deliver enormous payloads onto fixed targets. This includes the B-1 bomber, the B-2 stealth bomber, and even the old B-52s, which are technically old enough to collect Social Security benefits, but just like Barry Siegel, they have no plans to retire anytime soon. In fact, the B-52s are capable of carrying the largest payload, around 70,000 pounds, or 31,500 kilograms worth of explosives. That's mind-blowing. They've been sent in to hit Iran's missile cities, which were the underground caverns dug underneath mountains in Iran to hide the arsenal and launchers of ballistic missiles. Manufacturing capabilities have also been flattened in recent days, along with almost all of Iran's surface navy, submarines, what's left of the Air Force, remnants of the nuclear program, and more. This is all to the good, and it might be that when President Trump says the plans are ahead of schedule, he might be referring to this plan to wipe out the Ayatollah regime's strategic military assets. However, Iran has other strategic assets that Israel has been busy going after. Early Tuesday afternoon, the IDF confirmed that Ali Larijani, the Secretary of Iran's National Security Council, had been eliminated in an airstrike earlier in the day. In a separate strike around the same time, Basij paramilitary force commander Gholam Reza Soleimani was eliminated along with his deputy and several other senior Basij officers. Now, this is important for a few different reasons. To begin with, Larijani had established himself as the de facto leader of the regime following the strike in the first minutes of the war on the morning of February 28th, which eliminated Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with dozens of other senior regime leaders. Larijani was almost the only member of the regime's starting lineup who survived the first days of the war, and many analysts said he was by far the smartest and most capable of the bunch. But now he's gone, and it's unclear who, if anyone, can take his place. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. What about Mujtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old son of the eliminated Ali Khamenei, who the IRGC anointed as the successor to his father and the new supreme leader, declaring that he was proof the regime was still intact, still functioning, and still on top of the situation? Well, has he made any public appearances since the first day of the war? There are unconfirmed reports that he was present at the meeting where his father and so many of the IRGC's surviving senior officers were gathered when the missiles hit it. According to these reports, he was severely wounded in this strike, although I have a hard time believing even the IRGC would allow him to be named as the new supreme leader if he hadn't survived. On the other hand, if he's been wounded, he's kind of at their mercy, and he's the perfect figurehead for them to put up while quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes. In this context, it's worth noting reports that have come to the light that Ali Khamenei told some of his senior advisors that his son was not very bright and certainly not a good choice to become the next leader of the regime. Once again, if that's accurate, then it would make Mujtaba the perfect candidate for the IRGC to put up in public while they establish themselves as the real power behind the throne. Now, I want to move on once again to the IDF's campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But first, I must briefly mention two other proxies of the Islamic Republic, the Houthis in Yemen and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, the Houthis are one of the big surprises in this war because they have not fired a single missile at Israel in solidarity with their Iranian overlords. No one in Israel is complaining about this. I'm not, but it is very puzzling. Someday we might find out why. But for now, I'm going to say that as far as the Houthis are concerned, no news is great news. Concerning Hamas, there are concerning signs that they are consolidating their grip on the 47% of the Gaza Strip where the IDF is not present. They are also continuing to smuggle weapons. How? Ammunition and money into the Strip, mostly via drones being flown over the border from the Egyptian Sinai. That's how. This is not good news, but candidly, it's not catastrophic news either. There will be time to finish Hamas off later, when this war with Iran has been brought to a successful conclusion. The volumes of weapons and ammunition they're able to smuggle into the Strip via drones is a tiny fraction of what they used to smuggle in via tunnels running under the Egyptian border. Although they are still a problem that will have to be dealt with, they are no longer the threat they once were. As a side note, the communities which Hamas brutally attacked on October 7, 2023 are already beginning to come back to life. To life, l'chaim. Many people who fled the area in the immediate aftermath of the massacre have returned. Homes, schools, businesses, and communities are being rebuilt, and the visible scars from that terrible day are beginning to fade, although the trauma it caused all of us collectively is going to linger for a very, very long time. Now, speaking of trauma, let's talk about these ongoing missile and rocket attacks on Israeli cities by Iran and Hezbollah. As I'm sure you've heard, something new which has emerged in this war is that Iran is sending ballistic missiles at Israel that have a warhead that is not designed to explode when it hits the ground. Instead, this warhead is designed to break apart in mid-flight and scatter hundreds of smaller but still very dangerous cluster munitions over a wide area. Just to quickly mention that under this thing called international law, which haters of Israel love to talk about, this kind of weapon is only supposed to be used against military targets. It is a violation of international law to use it against civilian areas, but Iran is doing that very thing and not even bothering to make any excuses. The people who never stop talking about Israel and America violating international law are strangely silent as Iran does this, but of course no one is surprised by this. In any case, this weapon has caused a not insignificant amount of damage to the cities of Israel's coastal plain, and there has also been damage in the capital city of Jerusalem. Believe it or not, in the introduction, I mentioned that fragments from an intercepted missile landed in Jerusalem's Old City, damaging a Greek Orthodox seminary adjacent to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Some fragments also landed on the Temple Mount near the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and many other buildings in the Old City also got hit. This just adds fuel to the already white-hot rage that tens of millions of Arab people all over the Middle East are feeling towards the Ayatollah regime right now. They are angry at this regime for attacking their neighbors in the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Jordan, and even Oman, none of whom have taken any offensive action against Iran. They are also angry for the damage that Iran's actions are doing to the flow of oil and natural gas through the Strait of Hormuz. The Saudi government in particular is making no secret of the fact that it is urging the United States to keep hitting the regime and not to stop this war prematurely. That is the exact opposite of what the IRGC thought they'd accomplish by attacking their Arab neighbors, and it's exact opposite of what all these so-called Middle East experts said would happen. To switch briefly to commentary mode, if you don't mind, the commentary on this war from these experts and analysts has been as appalling as it's been baffling. John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs, two guys who have been wrong about so many things so many times that they should have no credibility with anyone anymore, have stood out in this regard. They're both appearing on news analysis shows all over the place peddling the false narrative that Israel dragged President Trump into this war, which America has already lost according to them, and which is going to be a disaster for all of us. Do I even need to mention Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and the ever more bizarre conspiracy theories and nonsense they're peddling all over this place? Friends, there's a young man here in Israel, a believer in Yeshua, and he's been reporting on this war since October 7th, repeating over and over again that this is a spiritual war as much as it is a kinetic war. He's absolutely right to say that this is, and I urge you to join me in heeding his plea, which he makes at the end of every one of his news reports, to pray into this battle. Wherever you are, you can do your part by praying for the American and Israeli soldiers who are on the front lines of this war, for the political leaders making decisions, and above all, for the peace of Jerusalem. There will never be peace on earth until there is peace in this city, which the Bible tells us is the earthly location where the God of Israel has put his name. That you can read in 2 Kings 21 verse 7 in case you're wondering. Now, speaking of Jerusalem and getting back to these rocket fragments that fell in the old city this week, it's very important to say that people are more important than buildings, even really old buildings that millions of people all over the world have strong emotional connections to. Now, Israel has suffered somewhat of about 20 fatalities or more in this war, and a few dozen serious injuries, some of whom are still fighting for their lives in hospitals and even as I am recording this video, but these numbers are very low compared to the amount of missiles Iran has fired at us, along with all the rockets, drones, and anti-tank missiles Hezbollah has fired at Israel, which we'll talk more about in a moment. The reason so few Israelis have been hit by all this ordnance that has been coming at us in this war is that the Israeli government values the lives of Israeli people, so that they've invested in air defense systems that can intercept these incoming weapons. They've also invested in building safe rooms, shelters, and protected spaces where Israelis can enter when they hear the sirens alerting them to an incoming missile. But there's not enough protected spaces for everyone, and there's no point arguing about that. It's just a fact, and because of this, over the last several years, Vision for Israel has been placing portable safety shelters in all over the country. Please watch this short video about this vitally important project. Now, a moment ago, I once again mentioned the battle against Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have been firing large numbers of rockets and missiles into Israel for the last couple of weeks, which is insane for all kinds of reasons. These attacks are not significantly distracting Israel from the campaign against Iran, since the main tool the IDF has for retaliation against Hezbollah is the ground forces, supported by helicopters, which are not relevant to the campaign against Iran. The only thing Hezbollah Hezbollah has done is provide Israel and the IDF with a perfectly legitimate pretext to significantly step up operations against them, which have been ongoing at a low rate for months. It must be said that the IDF has been somewhat surprised by the volume of fire Hezbollah has shown itself to be able to bring to bear against northern Israel, and this has caused a fair amount of damage. But once again, most of these incoming rockets have been intercepted, and the few that have gotten through have resulted in only a handful of casualties. Most of the injuries from incoming missiles and rockets have happened when people fell and hurt themselves as they rushed to get to a protected space during an alert. So friends, my brothers and sisters in Israel, take your time, be quick, but go carefully to the shelters. However, there have been a fair number of fires started in wooded areas of the Galilee by rockets and shrapnels. As I mentioned before, Vision for Israel has provided equipment to many firefighting teams all over the country in this crisis, and that effort continues because the need for it continues. When this war is over, and even before it ends, I am sure there will be a campaign to replant forests that have been damaged by these fires, because that's how we roll here in Israel. We don't give up. We don't despair. We just get to work fixing up and rebuilding what's been lost and damaged. So don't take my word for it. You can and should come to Israel when this war is over and see it for yourself. That brings me to another subject, which has been part of this war, and that's the narrative battle that is being fought in both traditional and social media platforms. I mentioned before about the so-called experts who are running their mouths off about how Iran has already won this war and Israel hoodwinked President Trump into embarking on a disastrous quagmire and so on. But other things are going on that also feed into the confusion and false narratives, and that includes a tsunami of AI-created videos that show, among other things, massive destruction in Tel Aviv, the funeral of our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, etc. Other false reports say that Netanyahu and the rest of the Israeli leadership have fled the country and are hiding in a castle in the Bavarian countryside, leaving the ordinary people of Israel to face the overwhelming power of Iran's missiles and Hezbollah's rockets alone, and so on and so on and so on. Well, I've seen several of these AI videos which purport to show the massive destruction in Tel Aviv, and I admit they do look scary. But the thing is, they look too scary. People should know better than to take this kind of silly nonsense seriously, especially when there's so many real videos that people have posted online showing Tel Aviv largely unscathed. Sure, there's some damage, and there'll probably be more damage before this war is over, but it's nothing that can't be managed, and it's all nothing compared to the massive damage inflicted on the IRGC and Iran's strategic military capabilities. And that's a good place to circle back to the overall strategic picture in this war. As always, I'd like to continue the tradition of ending these reports with some good news, and the good news is that the Middle East experts are wrong. The AI videos are fake. And Tucker Carlson is, to use a family-friendly term, talking rubbish. The war against the Ayatollah regime that has ruled Iran with an iron fist since hijacking that country in 1979 is going very well. The regime is being punished for its campaign of terrorizing its neighbors, spreading instability all over the Middle East and murdering thousands of Americans, Israelis, Arabs, Westerners, and above all, its own people. The day when this regime is tossed into the dustbin of history, hopefully by an uprising of its own long-suffering population, is drawing closer and closer. The other good news is that this will also be a spectacular strategic defeat for other totalitarian regimes, including the ones that rule North Korea, Russia, and China. It will also be a defeat for those radical Islamic forces that believe that it is the destiny of Israel to fall, and with it the God of the Bible who has put his name in Jerusalem and who chooses the Jewish people to be his own. With that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another great edition of VFI News from Israel. God bless you and shalom to all of you out there.